We've got our table with some rows in it, but not everything's going to fit nicely. We've seen that our table footer, for example, had that one simple column, and it was always going to be left justified and always lined up with those first columns. But we're going to see that we have needs for columns and rows to span, or rather to have a table data element span columns and rows. So on a particular table cell, we can use the col span and row span attributes to get those things to span across the table elements to render correctly. We go back to our table here. Let's add one more header. We'll call that uses. So this is where I want to come in now and add in some uses for these various lists. And I'll come down now to the unordered list, the first one, and I want to put a table data item in here and identify the use, and I'll say it's useful for displaying a simple list of items. Now if we save that and refresh, we can see that that makes sense, but I really want, conceptually, if we highlight this again, you can kind of see that. I really want that not just to be in the unordered list, but it really applies to the ordered list as well. So I'm going to do two things here. One, I'm going to come back up to my table and use something we'll talk about in a moment, which is the border, because that's going to make it a little easier for you to visualize how these cells are laying out. You can see now each of the cells has a border around them, and you can see how they're flowing. And then I'm going to come down to that table data again, and I'm going to add the row span. I'm going to say this particular item spans 2 rows. So the default obviously is that it would just span 1. We save that and refresh, and you can see now from the box and also the alignment of the text, that particular table cell now spans these 2 rows. So the content that's in there is going to flow across both of those rows. Likewise, I could go to my footer on the TD, and I could say col span equals 3. And now if I refresh, we can see that that's no longer stuck in the first column. Everything re-rendered a little bit here because this column is now spanning, or rather this cell is spanning 3 columns, and the other columns now can be rendered smaller because they don't have to. That first one doesn't have to fit all of this content. So this now spans all the way across those items. So the col span and the row span allow you to flow those table cells to really lay out the table the way you need to when you have data that perhaps applies to multiple rows or that applies to multiple columns. I'm showing it here with the column, the table data on the far right spanning the rows and the bottom spanning the columns, but it could really be anywhere within the table that you do this row span and col span.